Tonight we begin with a question that will haunt you long after this video ends. Imagine waking up in a place where the cold doesn't just bite, it devours, where silence is a currency more valuable than gold, and a single glance in the wrong direction can cost you everything, where the walls themselves seem to sweat with decades of suffering, and the air tastes like rust and desperation. Now imagine you, with your morning coffee habits and your smartphone withdrawal symptoms, thrust into this world without warning, without preparation, without hope. Sound dramatic? Good. Because we're about to walk through the iron gates of a Russian prison, and I promise you, every word of what comes next will make Hollywood's toughest prison movies look like summer camp. You think you know what hard time means? You think you've seen tough? Tonight, you're going to learn exactly why you, yes you, sitting comfortably wherever you are right now, wouldn't survive 24 hours in the belly of the Russian prison system. And here's the thing that makes this whole journey so deliciously terrifying. Everything I'm about to tell you is real. No embellishment needed. The reality is so much worse than anything you've imagined. So buckle up, because we're starting this descent together, and there's no turning back now. The gates are closing behind us, and the rules you've lived by your entire life are about to become completely, utterly meaningless. Subscribe if you'd like more stories like this, so you'll be the first to know when new uploads arrive. And in the comments, I'd love to hear your location and the time of day you're tuning in. Let's ease into tonight's journey together by first understanding where you're going. Forget everything you think you know about prisons. Forget Orange is the New Black. Forget Shawshank Redemption. Forget every sanitized Hollywood version of incarceration you've ever The Russian prison system, known formally as the Gulag system during Soviet times, and now operating under the Federal Penitentiary Service, is a beast of an entirely different nature. We're talking about institutions that exist in the furthest, most isolated corners of the largest country on Earth. Some of these facilities are so remote that they're accessible only by air or by months of dangerous overland travel through Siberian wilderness. Picture this. You're being transported to your new home, and you watch through a barred window as civilization literally disappears behind you. The cities fade, the towns fade. Eventually, even the villages fade. What replaces them is an endless expanse of taiga forest or frozen tundra stretching to the horizon in every direction. The isolation isn't just geographical, it's psychological. You're being removed from the world of the living and placed into a realm that operates by rules so alien, so brutal, that the human mind struggles to accept them as real. These prisons aren't just buildings, they're ecosystems of violence and suffering that have evolved over more than a century. They're the descendants of the original gulags, those labor camps that consumed millions of Soviet citizens during Stalin's reign. And while the political prisoners are mostly gone, the culture, the traditions, the unwritten laws, they've all survived. They've metastasized, they've become something worse. Now let me introduce you to the concept that will define every moment of your existence behind these walls. The code. Not the official Russian criminal code, no. I'm talking about the thieves' code, the Vorovskoy Zakon, a set of rules that governs prisoner society with the absolute authority of religious law. This code is older than the Soviet Union itself, dating back to the criminal underworld of Tsarist Russia, and it has survived every political upheaval, every reform, every attempt to eradicate it. Why? Because in the vacuum of official authority, in the chaos of prison life, human beings crave order, they crave structure, And the code provides exactly that, along with a hierarchy more rigid and unforgiving than any military organization. At the top of this hierarchy sit the vori vi zakone, the thieves in law, criminal aristocrats who have devoted their entire lives to crime and have been formally inducted into an elite criminal brotherhood through elaborate rituals. These are men who have never worked a legal job, never cooperated with authorities, never broken the code. They are the judges, the lawmakers, the gods of the prison universe. Beneath them are various other castes, the blatnai or decent criminals, the mujiki or working men, the kozli or goats who cooperate with authorities. And at the very bottom, below even the lowest criminal, are the opusheni, the lowered ones, the untouchables. This is a caste you can fall into through rape, through certain types of accusations, through violations of prison taboos so severe that you become literally toxic to touch. Once you're lowered, you're finished. You eat from separate dishes marked with symbols so others know not to accidentally use them. You sleep in designated areas. You cannot shake hands, cannot pass items directly to others, cannot participate in normal social interaction. You are, for all practical purposes, dead while still breathing. And here's what should terrify you. As a foreigner, as an outsider, you have no protection, no status, no understanding of the thousands of invisible rules that govern every interaction. You're walking through a minefield, blindfolded. Let's talk about your arrival, shall we? The processing, the introduction to your new reality. You're brought in, shackled, probably after days of transport in a prison train called a stoli pin wagon, a hellish contraption where prisoners are crammed into compartments so small you can't sit or stand properly, where the toilet is a hole in the floor and the smell of human waste and fear becomes your permanent atmosphere. But we'll get to the journey in detail later. Right now you're arriving, the gates open, the van or bus pulls into a courtyard surrounded by walls topped with razor wire, guard towers looming at intervals, searchlights that will make night into day should anyone be stupid enough to attempt escape. You're unloaded, still in chains, and herded into a processing area. The guards here aren't the bored, overweight cops you might find in a Western prison. These are men who view brutality as a professional skill, who have been shaped by a system that values control over rehabilitation, punishment over reform. They're not here to help you adjust. They're here to break you down, to strip away every shred of dignity and autonomy you possess, to make you understand that you are now property of the state. The intake process begins with a full-body search, but calling it a search is generous. It's a violation, a systematic humiliation designed to establish exactly where you now stand in the hierarchy of human worth. You're stripped naked in a cold room. Every cavity is searched. Every possession is taken. If you're lucky, you'll get some of them back eventually. If you're not, well, welcome to Russia. Your clothing, if you had any personal items, your toiletries, anything that connected you to your previous life, it's all confiscated. In return, you receive prison-issue clothing, rough, poorly fitting garments that offer minimal protection against the cold, because yes, it's always cold. We're talking about institutions where indoor temperatures can drop below freezing in winter, where your breath makes clouds even inside the barracks, where frostbite is not a dramatic possibility but a mundane reality. After processing, you're taken to your designated barracks, And this is where your real education begins. The moment you walk through that door, dozens of eyes turn to evaluate you, not with curiosity, with calculation. They're reading you like a book, determining from your posture, your eye contact, your reaction to the environment, exactly what you are and where you'll fit in their world. Are you strong? Are you weak? Are you someone who might challenge the established order, or someone who'll immediately submit? Are you fresh meat to be exploited, or a potential ally? These assessments happen in seconds, and they're rarely wrong. The prisoners who survive here have developed predatory instincts, honed by years or decades of constant vigilance. They can spot weakness the way a shark smells blood in water. And you, my friend, reek of weakness. You reek of softness. You reek of the outside world. The barracks itself is a long room packed with beds, 2 or 3 high, crammed so close together that privacy is a laughable concept. The air is thick with cigarette smoke, body odor, and that indefinable smell of confined humanity. Somewhere a radio or television might be playing, turned to whatever channel the local authority, usually the senior criminal in the barracks, has decided upon. No one asks what you want to watch. No one cares. If you're smart, you'll find an empty bed, the worst one available, usually near the toilet or in the coldest corner, and you'll claim it without protest. If you're stupid, you'll try to assert yourself, try to demand something better, try to act like you have rights. That's when the real fun begins. Within hours of your arrival, you'll face your first test. It might come in the form of a simple question, seemingly innocuous. Where are you from? What were you convicted of? Do you have any cigarettes? But nothing is simple here. Nothing is innocent. Every question is a trap, every answer a potential confession of status. Let's say someone asks if you have cigarettes and you say yes, then refuse to share. You've just marked yourself as greedy, as someone who doesn't understand the communal nature of certain resources in prison culture. If you lie and say no, but they find out you do have them, you're a liar, and liars are despised. If you immediately hand them over without hesitation, you're weak, easily exploited. The correct answer, the one that might buy you a few hours of peace, requires knowledge you don't possess. Maybe you should offer to share, but in a way that demonstrates you're not a pushover. Maybe you should redirect the question somehow. Maybe there's a ritual formula of words that marks you as someone who understands the code. You don't know, and your ignorance is about to cost you. Another common test is the request for you to hold something. A simple favor, right? Someone asks you to hold their bag, their cigarettes, their food while they do something. Seems harmless. But in the complex system of prison taboos, certain items become marked, become tainted based on who has touched them or where they've been. If you accept the wrong item, you've polluted yourself. If you refuse, you might be disrespecting someone you can't afford to disrespect. It's paralysis through complexity. A system so Byzantine in its rules that outsiders are virtually guaranteed to violate something within their first day. Now let's discuss the moment that will likely define your entire prison experience, the determination of your caste. This happens formally or informally, but it happens to everyone. The local prison authority, usually a representative of the Vori or a respected Blatnoi, will summon you for a conversation. This isn't optional. When you're called, you go. The conversation might happen in a relatively private corner of the barracks, or in a separate room if such luxury exists. You'll be asked direct questions about your past, your crime, your life. They're trying to determine if you're a legitimate criminal or one of the many categories of undesirables. Have you ever worked in law enforcement? Have you ever been an informant? Have you ever been convicted of rape or child abuse? Each of these is a potential death sentence, or worse, a sentence to the untouchable caste. But here's the trap. Lying is also forbidden by the code. If you lie and are later discovered, the punishment is severe, but telling certain truths is equally catastrophic. So you're caught in an impossible bind, expected to confess to things that will destroy you while being forbidden from lying to avoid destruction. This is assuming you even understand what they're asking. The Russian criminal slang, the fenya, is a language unto itself, full of words and phrases that have no direct translation. You might be confessing to something you don't understand, or failing to confess to something you don't realize they already know. The judgment, when it comes, is final. There's no appeal, no parole board, no lawyer to argue your case. If you're declared clean, legitimate, you're granted basic rights to exist in the prison society. You'll still be at the bottom, but you're at least inside the system. If you're declared something else, something dirty, you're marked forever. Let's get visceral for a moment and talk about the physical environment you're living in. I mentioned the cold earlier, but I want you to really understand what that means. In many Russian prisons, especially those in Siberia or the far north, the heating systems are inadequate at best, non-existent at worst. Imagine trying to sleep when the temperature in your barracks is hovering just above 0 degrees Celsius. Imagine wearing every piece of clothing you own, wrapping yourself in a thin blanket that does almost nothing, and still shivering so violently you can't rest. Your muscles ache from the constant tension. Your fingers and toes go numb. You develop chilblains, those painful swellings caused by exposure to cold and moisture, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't turn up the heat. You can't request extra blankets. You certainly can't go to the guards and complain. The guards don't care. In their view, you're a criminal. You deserve to suffer, and physical discomfort is part of your punishment. Besides, they're not much better off. The staff areas might be marginally warmer, but this is Russia, and the entire infrastructure is crumbling. Now add to this cold the issue of dampness. Many of these facilities are old, built decades ago with minimal maintenance since the walls leak, the roofs leak. When snow melts or rain falls, water finds its way inside, creating a perpetual dampness that soaks into everything. Your mattress, such as it is, becomes moldy. Your clothes never fully dry. The moisture combines with the cold to create an environment perfect for respiratory illnesses. Tuberculosis thrives in Russian prisons, spreading through the barracks like wildfire. Drug-resistant strains of TB, the kind that can kill you slowly and painfully, are endemic. You'll be sleeping surrounded by men with chronic coughs, men spitting blood into rags, men dying slowly because the medical care is virtually non-existent, and you'll know that every breath you take might be the one that infects you. Speaking of medical care, let's dive into that particular nightmare. Forget everything you understand about health care, about patient rights, about the Hippocratic Oath. The medical facilities in Russian prisons exist primarily on paper. In reality, they're often a single room with a nurse who may or may not have legitimate training, with supplies that ran out last month, with medications that expired last year. Got a toothache? Too bad. dental care is minimal to non-existent, that cavity will become an abscess, the abscess will become infected, the infection will spread to your jaw. Maybe, if you're lucky and complain loudly enough and bribe the right people, you'll eventually see someone who can pull the tooth with pliers and no anesthesia. Broke a bone? Hope it heals straight, because setting it properly probably isn't happening. Developed a chronic illness? Well, you might get some medication, but probably not the right kind, and probably not enough. The prison medical system operates on the assumption that prisoners are exaggerating their symptoms to get attention or avoid work. Unless you're literally dying, and sometimes even then, you're probably going to be told to tough it out. And if you do manage to get sent to a prison hospital, congratulations, you've just entered an even worse version of hell. Prison hospitals are where the most violent, most unstable prisoners often end up, along with those who are genuinely sick. It's a mixture of the insane, the diseased, and the dying, all crammed together with even less supervision than the regular prisons. The conditions make the barracks look luxurious. We're talking about blood and waste on the floors, patients tied to beds, screaming through the night, infections spreading unchecked because basic hygiene is impossible. You go to a Russian prison hospital to die, not to heal. Let's discuss food, because you have to eat to survive, and eating in a Russian prison is its own special form of torture. The official rations are calculated to provide just enough calories to keep you alive, nothing more. We're talking about thin soup with mysterious floating substances, bread that's more sawdust than grain, porridge that looks and tastes like wallpaper paste, occasional bits of fish or meat so far gone that you can't identify the species. The meals are served at specific times, and you eat what you're given when you're given it. There's no menu, no choices, no accommodation for dietary restrictions or preferences. Vegetarian? Too bad. Allergic to something? Hope it doesn't kill you. Religious dietary laws? The Russian prison system doesn't recognize your religion. The food is prepared in kitchens where hygiene standards are theoretical at best. Expect to find things in your meals that shouldn't be there. Hair, insects, bits of the kitchen, staff cigarettes, possibly rodent droppings. You'll get food poisoning. Not might, will. The question is how often and how severe. And here's a detail that will make your stomach turn. Remember those untouchables I mentioned? In many prisons, they're the ones assigned to work in the kitchens, handling food preparation. Their caste status makes them unemployable in most other jobs, so they end up cooking. Now, according to the code, these are people who are too polluted to touch, whose dishes must be marked to avoid contamination. But they're preparing everyone's food. Think about that for a moment. Think about the psychological warfare involved in forcing prisoners to eat food prepared by people they consider fundamentally unclean, while simultaneously maintaining the taboo against direct contact. It's a contradiction that gnaws at the mind, that creates constant, low-level stress and disgust. But the official rations are only part of the story. There's a robust black market economy in every Russian prison, dealing in everything from cigarettes to drugs to actual edible food. This economy runs on money sent from outside by family members, on bribes to guards, on payments for services rendered to other inmates. If you have access to funds, you can buy things that make life marginally more bearable. Real tea instead of the colored water they serve, canned meat or fish, chocolate, fresh vegetables. These items come through the prison store, a theoretical institution that's supposed to allow prisoners to purchase approved items. In reality, access to the store is controlled by the prison elite, who take their cut of everything. You don't just buy something, you buy permission to buy something. And if you're on the wrong side of the power structure, if you've been marked as an untouchable or otherwise undesirable, you might be forbidden from purchasing anything at all. You'll watch other inmates eating real food, smoking real cigarettes, and you'll know that you're consigned to slow starvation on official rations alone. The black market also deals in drugs, primarily marijuana, heroin, and various synthetic substances. These enter the prison through corrupt guards, through items thrown over walls, through visitors who smuggle them in body cavities. The drug trade is controlled by the criminal elite, who use it both for profit and for control. Keep the population sedated, keep them dependent, keep them manageable. If you're smart, you'll avoid the drugs entirely. If you're desperate for escape from the reality of your situation, if the psychological weight becomes too heavy, you might be tempted. And once you're in debt to the people who control the supply, you're owned. You'll do anything they ask to feed your addiction. Now we need to talk about work, because Russian prisons are labor camps in all but name. You will work. Not for rehabilitation, not for job training, but because the prison system is designed to extract economic value from its inmates. The work varies depending on the facility. Some prisons have factories attached, producing everything from furniture to uniforms to consumer goods. Some have agricultural operations growing food or raising livestock. Some have workshops doing repairs or assembly. The work is hard, the hours are long, and the pay is laughable. You might earn a handful of rubles per month, barely enough to buy a pack of cigarettes from the prison store, but the work isn't optional. Refusing to work is a violation that can result in punishment cells, loss of privileges, or marking you as a goat, someone who cooperates with the administration. There's a delicate balance required. You have to work enough to avoid official punishment, but not so enthusiastically that the criminal elite sees you as sucking up to the guards. You have to produce enough to meet quotas, but not so much that you make others look bad. It's exhausting, not just physically but mentally, and the conditions of the work are dangerous. Industrial accidents are common. Safety equipment is minimal or non-existent. If you lose a finger in a machine, if you're injured by falling materials, if you develop chronic pain from repetitive labor, well, refer back to the section on medical care. You're not getting real treatment. You're just going to work hurt until you physically can't anymore. The work details are also where hierarchies are enforced and scores are settled. Away from the barracks, out in a factory or field with minimal guard supervision. The strong prey on the weak. Debts are collected through violence. Disrespect is answered with beatings. If you've crossed the wrong person, a work accident can be arranged. You might fall, you might get hit by something, you might just disappear. The guards will investigate, meaning they'll file a report saying you were careless. Case closed. Let's talk about violence, the currency that actually runs the prison economy. Every interaction, every transaction, every relationship is underwritten by the potential for violence. It's not constant, not a 24-hour brawl, but it's always there, hovering just beneath the surface, ready to erupt at any provocation. The types of violence vary. There's the organized violence of the prison hierarchy maintaining order. If someone violates the code, punishment is swift and brutal. It might be a beating delivered by designated enforcers. It might be rape, used as a weapon to lower someone's caste. It might be mutilation, sending a message that's visible to everyone. There's personal violence, settling individual scores. Someone disrespected someone else, someone owes someone else, someone wants something someone else has. These disputes are often resolved through fighting, but not the kind of fighting you might imagine. These aren't Marquess of Queensberry rules. These aren't even street fight rules. This is violence designed to maim, to permanently damage, to send messages. Eyes get gouged out, throats get cut, limbs get broken in ways that ensure they never heal properly. And here's the thing about prison fights, they're not fair. There's no honor code requiring one-on-one combat. If you offend someone with connections, you don't get challenged to a duel. You get jumped by 5 guys while you're in the shower, while you're sleeping, while you're taking a shit in the communal toilet. They use whatever weapons are available, sharpened spoons, shanks made from bed frames, weighted socks filled with batteries or rocks, razors melted into toothbrush handles. These weapons are everywhere, hidden in mattresses, taped under tables, concealed in the million hiding places a creative mind can find. The guards know they exist. The guards don't care, as long as the violence doesn't spread to staff. There's also sexual violence, which deserves its own discussion. In the hierarchy of Russian prison society, sexual dominance is power. The act of rape isn't primarily about sexual gratification. It's about establishing status, about asserting control, about destroying someone's position in the social order. Being raped places you in the untouchable caste permanently. You become opuszczeni, lowered, and there's no way back from that. This creates a horrifying system where rape is used as a punishment, as a weapon, as a tool of social control. If you're accused of certain violations, if you lose a significant gambling debt and can't pay, if you disrespect someone powerful, you might be gang raped as punishment. And once it happens, you're finished. You can't report it to the guards because going to authorities is itself a violation of the code. You can't fight back effectively because you're outnumbered and overpowered. You can't escape the consequences because everyone will know what happened. The prison society will enforce your new status mercilessly. You'll be moved to the area where the lowered ones live, forced to use their marked dishes, forbidden from normal social contact. And here's the truly evil genius of the system. Once you're lowered, you become fair game for anyone who wants to use you. You have no protection, no rights, no recourse. You exist purely to be exploited. Many lowered prisoners don't survive long. They commit suicide, they're killed by other inmates, or they simply waste away from the combination of abuse and lack of access to resources. As a foreigner, as an outsider, you're particularly vulnerable to this fate. You don't know the rules. You don't have protection from a criminal network. You probably don't speak the language well enough to defend yourself verbally. You're a target. We should discuss the guards, the men and women who theoretically maintain order in this chaos. But here's the reality. The guards don't control the prisons. The criminals do. The guards control the perimeter, the gates, the official paperwork. Inside the prison, within the walls, the prisoner society governs itself according to the code. This isn't accidental, it's intentional. The Russian prison system recognized long ago that actually maintaining order among thousands of violent criminals would require resources they don't have and aren't willing to spend. So instead, they've made an implicit deal with the criminal hierarchy. You maintain order according to your rules. You keep the violence from spilling over into staff casualties. You prevent escapes and riots, and we'll leave you alone. We won't interfere with your code, with your justice, with your economy. The guards enforce this arrangement selectively. A fight between prisoners, not their problem, as long as no one dies where they have to do paperwork. Drugs being traded openly, they're getting their cut, so why would they stop it? Someone being raped in a corner, didn't see it, didn't happen. But a riot, an escape attempt, violence against guards, that brings the hammer down. Then you see what the Russian state is capable of when motivated. Special forces units storming the prison, live ammunition, no negotiation. Survivors beaten into submission and thrown into punishment cells. The duality of the guards is maddening. Some are decent people trying to do a difficult job. Some are sadists who became guards specifically for the opportunity to inflict pain with legal protection. Many are corrupt, supplementing their meager official salaries by facilitating the black market, accepting bribes, smuggling contraband. You never know which type you're dealing with until it's too late. Let's explore the punishment cells, the special hell reserved for those who violate official rules. These go by various names: the shizo, the isolator, the cooler. They're small cells, often sized so you can't fully lie down or stand up. Concrete floors, concrete walls, no heating, minimal light. You're placed in these cells for infractions ranging from fighting to insubordination to failing work quotas. The duration can be days or weeks. The conditions are designed to break you psychologically. It's solitary confinement in its most brutal form. The cold is worse than the regular prison because there's no body heat from other inmates, no movement to generate warmth. The food is even more reduced. Punishment rations that keep you alive but leave you constantly weak and hungry. There's usually no toilet, just a hole in the floor. No bedding beyond maybe a bare wooden platform. The silence is absolute when the door closes. No one to talk to, nothing to read, nothing to do but sit in the dark and cold and think about how you ended up here. Men go insane in the punishment cells. Not an exaggeration, literally insane. The combination of isolation, cold, hunger, and darkness does something to the human mind. You start hallucinating, you lose track of time, you forget what day it is, how long you've been there, whether any of this is real. When you're finally released and returned to the general population, you're changed, broken. And that's the point. The punishment cell exists not to rehabilitate but to terrorize. It's a threat hanging over every prisoner's head. Behave, or this is where you go. And after a stint in the punishment cell, most prisoners will do almost anything to avoid returning. Now let's discuss the absolute lack of privacy, the way you cease to exist as an individual. From the moment you enter the prison until the moment you leave, if you ever do, you are never alone. Never. You sleep in a room with dozens of other men. You eat with them. You shower with them in communal showers, where there are no stalls, no curtains, just a room with drains and shower heads and the constant awareness that you're naked and vulnerable. You use the toilet in full view of everyone because the toilets are either in the open or in stalls without doors. There's no moment where you can close a door, sit quietly, and just exist without being observed. This does something to your psyche. The constant vigilance required to protect yourself never ends. Even when you're sleeping, you have to maintain awareness. People get attacked in their sleep. Items get stolen in the night. You learn to sleep lightly, to wake at any disturbance, to never fully rest. The exhaustion accumulates. Weeks turn into months, months turn into years, and you're never genuinely relaxed, never safe, never at peace. The lack of privacy extends to communication. Any letter you write is read by censors before being sent. Any letter you receive is read before being delivered. Phone calls, if they're allowed at all, are monitored and limited in duration. Visits from family, rare and precious, happen in rooms with guards present, with strict rules about what can and can't be discussed. You can't speak freely, can't express yourself honestly, because anything you say might be used against you. The isolation from the outside world is profound. News filters in slowly and unreliably. You might hear about major events months after they happen. Your family's struggles, your friends' lives, everything that made you who you were, it all becomes distant and abstract. You start to forget what normal life feels like. The prison becomes your entire universe. Let's talk about the psychological warfare that never ends. The system is designed not just to punish your body, but to destroy your mind. It starts with uncertainty. You never know what's going to happen next. Will today be routine or catastrophic? Will the guard on duty be indifferent or sadistic? Will someone decide that today is the day to settle a score you didn't know existed? This constant state of uncertainty creates anxiety that gnaws at you. You can't plan, can't anticipate, can't control anything. Then there's the arbitrariness of the rules. The official rules change without notice. The unofficial rules are Byzantine in their complexity and are enforced with absolute rigidity. You violate rules you didn't know existed and are punished for ignorance. You follow rules that no longer apply and are punished for being stupid. There's no winning, no safe path through the minefield. The psychological impact of living in the caste system is devastating. If you're lucky enough to be accepted as a legitimate criminal, you still live in constant awareness of how precarious your position is. One mistake, one false accusation, one moment of bad luck, and you could fall to the bottom. If you're unlucky enough to be cast into the untouchable caste, you exist in a state of perpetual degradation. You internalize the society's view of you as worthless, polluted, less than human. Many prisoners in this position develop severe mental illnesses. Depression is universal. Anxiety disorders, PTSD, psychotic breaks, they're all common. And remember, mental health care is non-existent. If you're going crazy, you're going crazy alone. Let's discuss time itself, how it becomes your enemy. A sentence in a Russian prison isn't measured in months or years, it's measured in eternities. Each day is simultaneously endless and meaningless. The routine is rigid. Wake at a certain time, eat at certain times, work at certain times, sleep at certain times. Nothing changes. Nothing breaks the monotony except moments of terror and violence. You mark time by meals, by changing seasons visible through barred windows, by the slow accumulation of degradation in your body and mind. A 1-year sentence feels like 10. A 10-year sentence is unimaginable. Men serving life sentences, and Russia has many of them, simply cease to think about time. They exist in an eternal present, a limbo between life and death. The waiting is torture, waiting for letters that might not come, waiting for your sentence to end, waiting for the next meal, waiting for the next moment of violence, waiting for someone to decide your fate. You have no agency, no control, no ability to speed up or slow down anything. Time happens to you, And in this waiting, in this endless present tense, you start to lose your sense of self. Who were you before prison? It becomes hard to remember. What will you be after prison? It becomes impossible to imagine. You're just this thing that exists in this moment, in this place, forever. The cultural shock for a foreigner is impossible to overstate. Even if you speak Russian fluently, even if you've studied Russian culture, you're not prepared for the prison culture. It's a different world with different values. Things that seem obviously wrong to you are accepted norms. Things that seem innocuous to you are terrible offenses. Let's say you're American or Western European, raised with certain assumptions about human rights, about dignity, about the value of individual life. Those concepts don't translate here. In Russian prison culture, life is cheap. A man can be killed over an insult, over a perceived slight, over nothing at all. And no one mourns. No one demands justice. It's just understood that this is how things work. The concept of redemption, of rehabilitation, of serving your time and earning a second chance, it doesn't exist. The Russian prison system doesn't pretend to reform anyone. It's pure punishment, pure warehousing of undesirables. The staff don't see you as someone who made mistakes and can improve. They see you as garbage, as a burden, as something to be contained until you die or until your sentence expires. And the other prisoners see you as a resource to be exploited or a threat to be eliminated. There's no support system, no counseling, no programs to help you maintain your humanity. You're in a human warehouse, and the warehouse doesn't care if the contents spoil. Let's get specific about the daily humiliations. Every morning you wake to a count, guards enter the barracks, and you stand by your bed to be counted like livestock. If the count doesn't match, everyone waits while they recount and recount and recount. Could be an error, could be someone's dead in a corner, could be nothing. You wait. Then breakfast, that glorious meal of watery porridge and bread that's already stale. You eat it because you must. Then work assignments. You're marched to your work area under guard. The work is mind-numbing if you're lucky, dangerous if you're not. Hours pass in a blur of repetitive motion. Lunch is brought to the work site. More slop, more hours of work. Finally, back to the barracks. Dinner, then the evening, which might be the most dangerous time of day. This is when the prisoner society comes alive. Gambling games start. Scores are settled. The social hierarchy reasserts itself. If you're smart, you find a corner and make yourself invisible. If you're unlucky, you're called into a situation you don't understand and can't escape. Then sleep, if you can achieve it. And tomorrow, the exact same routine, and the day after, and the day after, forever. The mail system deserves its own exploration. Letters from the outside world are lifelines, proof that you still exist to someone beyond the walls. But getting mail is complicated. First, your family has to know where you are, which isn't always communicated clearly. Second, they have to be willing to write, which many families stop doing after a while. The shame, the expense, the emotional burden, it breaks people on the outside too. Third, the letters have to survive the censorship process. Censors read every word, looking for contraband information, for escape plans, for anything they decide is inappropriate. They might redact sections with thick black ink. They might simply confiscate the entire letter and you'll never know it existed. And if you receive a letter, reading it becomes a complex emotional experience. Your mother writes about her health problems and you can't help her. Your children write about missing you, and you can't comfort them. Your partner writes about struggling with bills, about the loneliness, about how hard everything is, and you're helpless, trapped, useless. The guilt compounds. You start to wonder if they'd be better off forgetting you, moving on, pretending you died. Some prisoners request their families stop writing because the pain of connection to a world you can't access is worse than the numbness of isolation. Writing letters back is equally fraught. You have limited paper, limited writing implements, and everything you write will be read by hostile eyes. You can't be honest about conditions because that might be classified as anti-state propaganda. You can't discuss other prisoners because that might be informing. You can't express despair because your family is suffering enough. So you write bland reassurances that everything is fine, that you're managing, that they shouldn't worry. You lie to protect them, and in lying, you increase the distance between you. The letters become hollow rituals, exchanges of meaningless pleasantries that satisfy no one. Now let's discuss the economy of debt that entraps nearly everyone. In a Russian prison, everything runs on debt. Someone gives you cigarettes when you're desperate, and now you owe them. Someone helps you avoid a beating, and now you owe them. Someone shares their food when you're starving, and now you owe them. These debts accumulate, and they come with interest. Borrow 1 cigarette, pay back 2. The interest rates are obscene, compounding rapidly, and there's no bankruptcy protection. You can't discharge these debts. You can't negotiate them. You pay, or you face consequences. Some prisoners become permanent debt slaves, working for their creditors, giving up all their resources, existing solely to service debt they'll never escape. Others try to refuse new debt, but that's nearly impossible. Someone does you a favor you didn't ask for, and suddenly you owe them. It's a trap with no exit. The debts can be transferred, sold to other prisoners, inherited if you die. They follow you from prison to prison if you're transferred. The criminal network has long memory and reach. And here's where it gets really dark. If you can't pay a debt, it might be converted into sexual currency. You'll be forced to perform acts, or you'll be lowered as payment. Your body becomes the commodity that settles accounts. The debt economy is how the hierarchy maintains control without constant violence. The threat of unpayable debt keeps everyone compliant, keeps everyone desperate, keeps everyone trapped in the system even when physical chains aren't necessary. Let's talk about the religious and spiritual vacuum. Even if you're religious, practicing your faith in a Russian prison is nearly impossible. The Orthodox Church has a presence in some facilities, but it's limited and often corrupted. Priests who minister in prisons are sometimes compromised, sometimes working with authorities, sometimes just going through motions. The prisoners don't trust them. Prayer meetings, if they exist, are watched by guards and infiltrated by informants. Any gathering is suspect, any organization a potential threat to control. If you're not Orthodox Christian, forget it. Other religions are barely recognized. Want to pray 5 times a day? Want to observe dietary laws? Want to celebrate your holy days? Too bad. The system doesn't accommodate you. You're expected to conform to the dominant culture or suffer. And even personal, private faith becomes difficult to maintain. How do you believe in a loving God when you're surrounded by such concentrated evil? How do you maintain hope when every day brings fresh evidence that the universe is indifferent to suffering? Many prisoners lose their faith entirely. They conclude that if God exists, He's abandoned this place. The spiritual emptiness becomes another form of death, a hollowing out of the soul that leaves you as a shell performing the mechanical functions of survival without purpose or meaning. The changing seasons bring different challenges, different forms of suffering. Summer in a Russian prison is suffocating. The buildings are designed to retain heat against the winter cold, which means in summer they become ovens. The barracks turn into sweat boxes. The air becomes thick and putrid, saturated with the smell of dozens of unwashed bodies. Ventilation is minimal. Heat exhaustion and dehydration are constant threats. The water supply is limited and often contaminated. You're thirsty all the time, but drinking the available water might make you sick. The heat brings insects, flies swarming the toilets and the dining area, mosquitoes breeding in any standing water, bed bugs infesting the mattresses and feeding on you at night. You wake covered in bites, itching incessantly, unable to escape the parasites. Skin infections from scratching become common. Fall is brief and deceptive, a short window of tolerable temperatures before the real enemy arrives. Winter in Siberia, in the Russian far north, in any of the remote areas where prisons are located, is a force of nature that wants you dead. The temperatures drop to -30, -40 degrees Celsius. The walls frost over on the inside. Your breath freezes in the air. The cold is physically painful, a constant ache in your bones, a burning in your lungs with every breath. Frostbite is common. Toes and fingers turn black and die. Hypothermia is a real risk even indoors. You huddle with other prisoners for warmth, pressing together like animals, temporary alliances of necessity that dissolve when the temperature rises. The spring thaw brings its own misery. Flooding, mud, the awakening of all the filth that was frozen during winter. The prison grounds turn into a swamp. Everything is wet and rotting. Let's discuss language barriers and how they multiply every danger. If you don't speak Russian fluently, you're operating in a fog. You miss crucial information. Someone warns you about something, and you don't understand until it's too late. Someone asks you a loaded question, and you answer incorrectly because you don't grasp the subtext. The prison slang, the fenya, is particularly impenetrable. It's evolved over more than a century, incorporating words from Yiddish, Romani, Turkic languages, and pure invention. Entire conversations happen in code that sounds like Russian but isn't. You might think you understand when you understand nothing. The inability to communicate makes you vulnerable in every interaction. You can't defend yourself verbally. You can't negotiate. You can't explain. You're reduced to gestures and simple words, like a child, which marks you as weak and exploitable. Other prisoners will take advantage of your linguistic helplessness. They'll claim you agreed to things you didn't agree to. They'll misrepresent what you said. They'll use your confusion to trap you in violations of the code. And even when you do understand the words, you don't understand the cultural context. Russian prison culture has its own references, its own history, its own shared knowledge that everyone is expected to possess. You don't possess it, you're an illiterate, stumbling through a complex text, and every misreading has consequences. The tattoos deserve extensive discussion because they're a complete language, a permanent record of a prisoner's life and status. In Russian criminal culture, tattoos aren't decoration, they're documentation. Every image means something specific. The number of domes on a cathedral indicates the number of convictions. A star on the shoulders means you're a thief in law or aspiring to be one. A rose means you turned 18 in prison. A skull means you've killed. The locations matter as much as the images. Certain tattoos can only be earned through specific actions. Certain tattoos can only be worn by certain castes. If you have a tattoo you haven't earned, you'll be forced to remove it, and the removal process is brutal. They'll burn it off with heated metal, they'll cut it out with blades, they'll sand it away with broken glass. The pain is the point. You claimed a status you don't possess, and now you pay. For a foreigner with tattoos from the outside world, this becomes a minefield. That tribal armband you got in college, it might mean something in prison. That Chinese character you thought meant strength, it might be interpreted as something else entirely. You'll be called to explain every mark on your body, and if the explanations aren't satisfactory, you're in trouble. Many foreigners end up having to cover or remove tattoos that are innocent in their culture but offensive in prison culture. The irony is that you might be forced to get new tattoos marked with your crimes or status or as property of a particular group. The marking process uses improvised equipment, needles made from guitar strings, ink made from burnt rubber and urine, no sterilization, no anesthesia. Infections are common. Hepatitis and HIV transmission through shared needles is rampant. But refusing to be marked when ordered is insubordination, and the consequences of that refusal are worse than the risks of infection. Let's explore the particular horrors faced by different categories of prisoners. Political prisoners, though rarer now than in Soviet times, still exist, and they're especially vulnerable. The criminal population views them with suspicion or contempt. You're not a real criminal, you're someone who challenged the state, which makes you either crazy or weak. You don't have criminal credentials, you don't know the code, and you probably maintain some naive belief in justice and rights. You're fresh meat. Foreign prisoners, which you are in this scenario, occupy a strange position. On one hand, you're exotic, interesting, potentially useful. If you have money, if you have connections, if you can facilitate something, you might be treated with cautious respect. On the other hand, you're an outsider, a violation of the homogeneous prison culture, and you're fair game for exploitation. Your foreignness makes you suspicious. Are you a spy? Are you working for authorities? The paranoia is constant. Young prisoners, especially first-timers, are targeted immediately. The older, experienced criminals see them as resources. Young men are coerced or forced into sexual slavery, becoming wives for dominant prisoners. Once this happens, their status is destroyed. They can never recover. They exist as property, passed around, used and discarded. The system doesn't protect them. The guards don't intervene. It's accepted as part of prison life. Elderly prisoners face different challenges. If they've been in the system for decades, if they're respected criminals, they might have some protection from their reputation. But elderly prisoners without status simply suffer. They can't work as hard, can't fight back, can't maintain the vigilance necessary for survival. They're pushed aside, ignored, left to die slowly. The medical neglect hits them hardest. Elderly prisoners die from treatable conditions, from simple infections, from the cumulative weight of decades of abuse. Now let's discuss the mail order bride of prison horrors, the prison train journey. When you're transferred between facilities, you travel in a stoli-pin wagon, and this experience alone could break most people. These are ancient train cars divided into tiny compartments. Each compartment, designed for maybe 4 people, holds 10 or 12. You're crammed in so tightly that sitting requires everyone to coordinate their positions. Lying down is impossible. The journey might take days or weeks, depending on the distance. During this time, you exist in a metal box with minimal ventilation, no climate control, and a hole in the floor for a toilet. The smell becomes unbearable within hours. In summer, the heat is suffocating. In winter, you might freeze. Food is thrown through a slot at irregular intervals, usually just bread and possibly some thin soup. Water is scarce. Prisoners have died of dehydration on these journeys. The psychological impact of being trapped in these conditions with violent criminals is severe. Scores are settled, the weak are victimized, the strong establish dominance, and there's nowhere to go, nowhere to escape. You're locked in a moving cage with predators, and the journey feels infinite. When you finally arrive at your destination, you're so traumatized by the transport that the prison itself almost seems tolerable by comparison. Almost. Let's talk about the total absence of rehabilitation programs. In Western prisons, at least theoretically, there are educational opportunities, vocational training, therapy, programs designed to give inmates tools for reintegration into society. In Russian prisons, these concepts are jokes. Education, maybe a library with a few dozen battered books, if you're lucky. Vocational training, you'll learn to work in a factory making goods for pennies, skills that are useless in the outside economy. Therapy? What therapy? You're a criminal, you're supposed to suffer, not heal. The preparation for release is non-existent. When your sentence ends, you're given your confiscated belongings, maybe a small amount of money, and pushed out the gate. You have no job prospects, no housing, no support system. If you're a foreigner, you're likely deported immediately, sent back to your country with a criminal record and trauma that will haunt you forever. If you're Russian, you're expected to reintegrate into society despite having been systematically dehumanized for years or decades. The recidivism rate is astronomical because the system creates better criminals, not reformed citizens. You learn violence, you learn criminal skills, you learn to survive in an environment that bears no resemblance to normal society, and then you're thrown back into that normal society with no tools for functioning in it. The corruption permeates every level. Guards can be bribed for almost anything. Want a better bed? Pay. Want access to the prison store? Pay. Want a letter to actually be mailed? Pay. Want to avoid a beating? Pay. The prices are arbitrary. The guards take what they want, and you have no recourse. Family members on the outside are extorted regularly. Call this number if you want your loved one to be treated well. Send money to this account if you want them to receive medical care. The corruption extends to the courts, to the police, to every institution that touches the prison system. Justice is for sale, and if you can't afford it, you're condemned. Even verdicts can be influenced by bribes. Sentences can be reduced or increased. Evidence can appear or disappear. The entire system is a machine for extracting money from desperate people. And the cruelest part is that even when you pay, there's no guarantee you'll receive what was promised. The guard takes your bribe and then ignores you anyway. The official promises consideration but delivers nothing. You're robbed without even the dignity of getting what you paid for. Let's discuss the informant culture that makes trust impossible. The Russian prison system, like most authoritarian prison systems, relies heavily on informants. They're everywhere. These prisoners who report to guards in exchange for privileges or protection or reduced sentences. You can't know who they are. Your cellmate might be one. The friendly prisoner who offers advice might be one. The person you confide in about your fears might be one. This uncertainty poisons all relationships. You can't form real friendships because friendship requires trust, and trust will get you betrayed. You learn to speak in vague terms, to never reveal anything important, to assume any conversation might be reported. The paranoia becomes exhausting. Even casual interactions are calculated. Every word weighed for potential consequences. And the informants themselves are trapped in a horrible position. If their role is discovered by other prisoners, they're marked as goats, the caste that cooperates with authorities. This is only slightly better than being untouchable, and in some prisons, it's treated the same way. Informants are beaten, raped, killed, so they inform out of fear, which makes them more desperate, which makes them inform more. It's a cycle that destroys everyone involved. The administration encourages this because a divided prisoner population is easier to control. If the inmates are busy suspecting and attacking each other, they're not organizing against the guards. The medical experiments deserve attention, though they're less common now than in Soviet times. But the history is there, and the culture persists. Prisoners have historically been used as test subjects for medications, procedures, and treatments without informed consent. Need to test a new drug? Use prisoners. Want to practice a surgical technique? Use prisoners. This created a well-founded fear of the medical system that continues today. Even when treatment is offered, prisoners suspect ulterior motives. Is this medication actually going to help, or is it experimental? Is this procedure necessary, or are they practicing on you? The fear keeps prisoners from seeking medical help even when they desperately need it, which compounds health problems, which leads to more suffering and death. The Soviet legacy of viewing prisoners as expendable resources hasn't fully disappeared. You're not human, you're material, and material can be used however the state sees fit. Let's talk about the moment of release, assuming you survive to see it. You've served your time, your sentence is complete, you're being processed out. This should be a moment of joy, of liberation, but it's actually terrifying. You've spent years or decades adapting to prison rules, prison culture, prison rhythms. You've learned to survive in an environment where normal human behavior gets you killed, and now you're being thrown back into normal society, expected to just readjust. But you can't. Your instincts are all wrong for the outside world. You're hypervigilant, aggressive, paranoid. You can't sleep without checking your surroundings constantly. You can't eat in a restaurant without scanning for threats. You can't have normal conversations because you're listening for subtext, for traps, for code violations. Every interaction is filtered through the prison lens, and the trauma doesn't just disappear. The things you've seen, the things you've experienced, the things you were forced to do to survive, they're burned into your mind. You have nightmares, you have flashbacks. Loud noises make you panic. Crowds make you anxious. Being confined makes you claustrophobic. Being in open spaces makes you feel vulnerable. There's no winning, no comfortable position, no state of being where you feel safe. The PTSD is profound and untreated. Mental health services in Russia are limited and stigmatized. Former prisoners aren't sympathetic figures who receive help. They're criminals who should be grateful they're free. So you struggle alone, trying to piece together some semblance of a life from the ruins of who you used to be. The social stigma of being a former prisoner in Russia is intense. Your criminal record follows you everywhere. Employers won't hire you. Landlords won't rent to you. People cross the street to avoid you. Your family might reject you, unable to handle the shame or the changes in your personality. Friends have moved on, built lives that don't include you. You're alone, stigmatized, traumatized, with no resources and no support. The temptation to return to crime is overwhelming. It's what you know. It's where you have connections. It's the only world that makes sense anymore. This is how the system creates career criminals. You can't reintegrate into normal society. So you commit new crimes, you get caught, you go back to prison, and the cycle repeats until you die. And here's the sick joke. Part of you might actually be relieved to go back. Prison is horrible, but it's familiar. You know the rules there. You know how to survive. The outside world has become more alien and frightening than the prison ever was. So you self-sabotage, consciously or unconsciously, and you return to the only place where you understand how things work. Let's discuss the specific scenario of you, specifically you, trying to survive in this system. You're reading this from whatever comfortable place you're in right now. You have access to the internet, to warmth, to food, to safety. You're soft. Not an insult, just a fact. You've been shaped by a society that values comfort, that protects individuals, that offers second chances. You don't have the skills, the mindset, the ruthlessness required to survive in a Russian prison. On your first day, you'd make mistakes, you'd make eye contact wrong, you'd respond to questions incorrectly, you'd violate taboos you don't know exist. Within hours, you'd be marked as prey. The predators would circle, testing you, probing for weaknesses, and they'd find weaknesses everywhere because you're full of them. You believe in fairness, in human rights, in the rule of law. None of those things exist there. You expect that if you're polite, if you're reasonable, if you explain yourself clearly, people will understand. They won't. Politeness is weakness, reasonableness is vulnerability. Your words mean nothing compared to your actions, and you don't know what actions to take. You'd probably try to be friendly, to make allies, to find common ground with other prisoners. This would mark you as naive and desperate, as someone who doesn't understand that friendship has to be earned through demonstrations of value or strength, neither of which you possess. You'd probably trust someone who shows you kindness, not realizing that kindness in prison always comes with a price. That friendly prisoner who shares his food, he's calculating what you'll owe him. That helpful guy who explains the rules, he's grooming you for exploitation. Within a week, you'd be in debt, you can't pay, you'd have violated the code multiple times, and you'd be facing consequences you can't imagine. The first beating would shock you. You'd expect it to stop, to follow some rules, to end when you're clearly beaten. It wouldn't. They'd keep going until they'd sent whatever message they intended to send. You might lose teeth. You might sustain permanent injuries. The guards wouldn't intervene. The medical staff wouldn't help. You'd heal slowly and badly, and you'd be even more vulnerable than before. The psychological impact would destroy you faster than the physical abuse. You're not prepared for the absolute absence of hope, of help, of rescue. There's no appeal to make, no authority to complain to, no escape route. You're trapped in a nightmare, and unlike actual nightmares, you can't wake up. The despair would be crushing. Many prisoners in your situation attempt suicide. They use whatever methods are available, hanging themselves with torn sheets, cutting their wrists with smuggled blades, deliberately provoking fatal beatings. Some succeed. Some fail and face punishment for the attempt, because suicide is seen as destroying state property. You'd think about suicide constantly. It would seem like the only exit, the only way to end the suffering. But you probably wouldn't have the courage to go through with it. So you just continue existing in a state worse than death, day after day, week after week, month after month. The language barrier would compound everything. You'd miss warnings, misunderstand threats, fail to defend yourself verbally. Other prisoners would mock you, imitating your accent, laughing at your mistakes. This mockery would erode your dignity faster than anything else. You'd become a clown, entertainment for bored criminals, a figure of fun with no respect and no protection. And even if you tried to learn Russian, tried to pick up the slang, tried to adapt, you'd always be an outsider. Your foreignness is indelible. You can't pass as one of them. You'll always be the other, the stranger, the one who doesn't belong. This otherness makes you permanently vulnerable. The best you could hope for is finding a protector, a stronger prisoner who decides to keep you safe in exchange for services. But protection comes at a cost. You'd become property owned, used for whatever your protector desires, maybe labor, maybe sexual services, maybe just the status of having a foreign pet. You'd have no choice but to accept, because the alternative is worse. You'd rationalize it, telling yourself it's survival, it's temporary, it's necessary. But inside, you'd know you've been broken, reduced to a thing rather than a person. The shame would eat at you, the humiliation would be constant. And still, you'd endure it, because the human survival instinct is strong, even when survival means living in hell. Let's examine the totality of sensory assault that defines life in a Russian prison. The sounds are constant and maddening. Metal doors clanging shut, keys rattling, guards shouting, prisoners arguing in harsh voices. The endless cacophony of hundreds of people confined together. There's no quiet, no peace, no silence except in the punishment cells, and there the silence is its own form of torture. The smells are overwhelming. Unwashed bodies, overflowing toilets, rotting food, cigarette smoke, industrial chemicals from work areas, the sweet, sick smell of infection and disease. These odors permeate everything. Your clothes absorb them, your skin absorbs them. You can't escape them, can't get clean, can't breathe air that doesn't taste like suffering. The visual environment is deliberately oppressive. Gray walls, harsh lighting or insufficient lighting, bars and wire and concrete everywhere you look. Nothing soft, nothing beautiful, nothing to rest your eyes on. The constant visual reminder that you're caged, confined, controlled. Touch brings no comfort. Everything is rough, cold, hard. The concrete floors, the metal bed frames, the coarse fabric of prison clothes. Even human contact, when it happens, is usually violent or violating. Gentle touch, affectionate touch, doesn't exist. You forget what it feels like to be touched with kindness. The taste of the food, we've covered, but it's worth emphasizing how the constant consumption of barely edible slop affects you. Your palate deadens. You forget what real food tastes like. When you do receive something decent through the black market or a rare package from outside, the taste is so intense it's almost painful. Your senses have adapted to deprivation, and pleasure becomes overwhelming and disorienting. The complete absence of beauty is its own form of torture. Humans need beauty, need some exposure to aesthetics, to nature, to art. In a Russian prison, these things don't exist. The architecture is brutal. The surroundings are industrial or barren. You might glimpse the sky during exercise periods, but it's framed by walls and wire, your view of freedom constrained and mocked. Some prisoners try to create beauty, drawing on whatever paper they can find, crafting small objects from available materials, writing poetry, but these efforts are fragile and often destroyed. Your drawing gets confiscated, your carving gets thrown away, your poem gets mocked or used as evidence of mental instability. The administration views any creative expression with suspicion. It suggests you have time and energy for something beyond the struggle for survival, which means you need to be worked harder or punished more severely. The prohibition against beauty is deliberate. You're being systematically deprived of everything that makes life worth living, everything that distinguishes humans from animals. Food becomes fuel. Sleep becomes temporary unconsciousness. Social interaction becomes predation. Love, joy, hope, aspiration, all the higher human experiences, they're systematically crushed out of you until you're reduced to base survival instinct. And this reduction is the goal. A broken prisoner is a compliant prisoner. A hopeless prisoner doesn't organize, doesn't rebel, doesn't demand rights or dignity. You become easy to manage because you've forgotten you're human. Let's talk about the few sources of relief, the tiny moments of not quite happiness that prisoners cling to. A letter from home, even censored, even bringing bad news, is still connection. For the hours after receiving it, you feel like you exist to someone beyond the walls. A slightly better meal, perhaps during a holiday when standards marginally improve, provides a moment of physical satisfaction. A day without violence, without confrontation, without crisis, feels like victory. You celebrate these tiny absences of suffering as if they were actual joy. The standard for happiness drops so low that merely not being tortured feels good. This is what prison does to your mind. It recalibrates your expectations until the absence of acute misery feels like blessing. Some prisoners find relief in exercise, pushing their bodies to exhaustion in the yard, using pain and fatigue to quiet the constant mental anguish. Some find it in books, if they can access them, losing themselves in stories that transport them out of their reality for precious hours. Some find it in religion, though, as discussed, practicing faith is difficult. Some find it in drugs, though that path leads to addiction and destruction. Some find it in planning their future, imagining the life they'll build when released, though these plans are usually fantasies that will never materialize. Some find it in helping weaker prisoners, exercising what little agency they have by protecting someone more vulnerable, though this is dangerous and can draw unwanted attention. The common thread in all these coping mechanisms is distraction. You're trying not to think about where you are, what's happening to you, how long you have left. You're trying to get through the next hour, the next day, without fully confronting the reality of your situation, because full confrontation with that reality is unbearable. The complete powerlessness is perhaps the most psychologically devastating aspect. You control nothing, not what you eat, not where you sleep, not when you wake or sleep, not your safety, not your future, Everything is decided by others, by guards, by the criminal hierarchy, by the whims of fate. This powerlessness creates a specific kind of psychological damage called learned helplessness. You stop trying to improve your situation because you've learned that effort is futile. Why resist a beating when resistance just makes it worse? Why complain about conditions when complaints are ignored or punished? Why hope for justice when justice doesn't exist? You become passive, reactive rather than active, a thing that events happen to rather than a person who makes choices. This passivity becomes ingrained, a personality change that persists long after release. Former prisoners often struggle with decision-making, with taking initiative, with believing they can influence their own lives. The prison has taught them they're helpless, and that lesson is hard to unlearn. Some prisoners resist this passivity, maintain their sense of agency through small acts of defiance. They refuse to be broken, hold on to their identity and will. These are the rare strong ones, and they either become part of the criminal elite or they die fighting. There's no middle ground for the strong. You either dominate or you're destroyed for trying. For average people, for people like you, the best strategy is usually invisibility. Don't stand out, don't attract attention, exist in the margins, and hope to be overlooked. It's a cowardly survival strategy, but it's pragmatic. Heroes die in Russian prisons. Cowards sometimes make it out alive. Finally, let's address the question that started this entire journey. Why wouldn't you last a day in a Russian prison? Because everything you are, everything you've been taught, everything you believe about how the world works, it's all wrong for that environment. Your moral framework is a liability. Your education is useless. Your social skills don't translate. Your physical condition is inadequate. Your mental resilience is untested and insufficient. You're a product of a society that has, despite its flaws, offered you protection, offered you opportunity, offered you the luxury of never having to fight for your life. You've never been truly hungry, truly cold, truly afraid for extended periods. You've never had to hurt someone to survive. You've never had to submit to absolute degradation as a strategic choice. You've never had to calculate whether death might be preferable to continued existence. These aren't experiences you can prepare for through reading or imagination. They fundamentally change who you are at a neurological level, and you'd be experiencing them alone, without support, without guidance, without hope of rescue. Every other prisoner has adapted because they had to, because they were shaped by Russian culture and criminal culture and the brutal process of prison socialization. You're being thrown into the deep end without knowing how to swim, and the water is full of sharks. Your drowning is inevitable, not metaphorical drowning, actual destruction of self. Within a day, you'd understand the impossibility of your situation. Within a week, you'd be broken. Within a month, if you survived that long, you'd be unrecognizable to anyone who knew you before. Within a year, you'd either be dead, permanently damaged, or transformed into something monstrous. There is no fourth option. There is no redemption arc, no overcoming adversity through pluck and determination. Russian prison doesn't make you stronger. It makes you broken or dead. And that's the truth you needed to understand tonight. That's why we took this journey together into the darkest corner of the modern world. Not to entertain you, though I hope the presentation has been compelling. Not to scare you, though you should be scared, but to make you understand how fragile your comfortable life is, how quickly everything you depend on could be stripped away, how thin the veneer of civilization really is. Russian prisons exist right now, today. while you're watching this. Real human beings are suffering through everything I've described. They're cold right now, hungry right now, afraid right now, and most of them will never escape. Their sentences, their suffering, their destruction, it continues day after day, year after year, while the world ignores them. So maybe after hearing all this, you'll have a bit more appreciation for what you have. Maybe you'll think twice before taking risks that could land you in a place like this. Maybe you'll feel some compassion for people trapped in systems designed to break them. Or maybe you'll just move on to the next video, forget everything I've told you, and continue your comfortable life without reflection. That's your choice. That's the luxury of not being in a Russian prison. You still have choices. They don't